How's everybody doing? Last week, one of my viewers asked if I could do a video talking about reverse mortgages, and I figured why not? It was on my list of things to talk about. And now, before I get into this, the only thing I really knew about reverse mortgages was how they work. I've never actually seen one. But most of the time there was a lot of negativity around the idea of reverse mortgages. As I've been looking into them a little bit more, I can understand the negativity, but I could also see a situation where a reverse mortgage could make sense for certain people. So it's definitely, as it kind of always is in financial planning, a case-by-case basis. And before I get going on this, one thing that I really want to say is that if you are considering getting a reverse mortgage, please go with a CFP professional that actually knows what your financial plan is while you're talking to the representative that's trying to sell you on this product, because there's a lot of questions that you're going to want to ask, and maybe it's not in your best interest, even though it sounds great, because you can imagine that anybody that's actually selling one of these things is going to be compensated fairly handsomely for setting you up with one. So today I'm going to talk about reverse mortgages, how they work, how you repay them, how you get them. I'm going to talk about a few of the pros and cons, and then I'm going to go through an example that I just did at the very end of writing this thing, and it didn't work out quite as well as I thought it might. So let's get into it, and we'll talk about that at the end. In order to be eligible for a reverse mortgage in Canada, it's pretty simple. You have to be over 55 years old. You have to be a homeowner. You don't have to own the entirety of your home, and that home has to be your principal residence, which reminds me that I should probably talk about the principal residence exemption and how you can sort of manipulate that if you have a second property, a recreation property. It might save you some taxes down the road. Now, if you and your spouse are both on title of the house and you want to do a reverse mortgage, then both of you need to be 55 years old. Pretty simple. How much you can get depends on, obviously the value of your home, and there is also going to be some sort of formula, I hope, based on your age. From what I understand, there is. And when I get into my example, you'll see why. Because if you have it for too long, it could potentially not be the greatest thing. So we'll get into that. But from what I understand, in Canada, you can borrow up to 55% of the value of your home in a reverse mortgage. This can come to you in a lump sum or in a big chunk and then paid over time. If you still owe money on your mortgage before you do this, immediately you are going to have to use the proceeds to either pay off your mortgage or any other loans that are tied to your actual home. So like a HELOC or any other loan that's tied to your home is going to have to be paid off immediately, and you will likely no longer be able to borrow any sort of money against your home ever again. Repayment is very simple. That's the best thing about reverse mortgages, is that you don't actually have to repay anything while you have the money. The interest builds up and your home equity builds up, and when you pass away, then, and the second spouse passes away, then all of a sudden your estate is going to have to sell the home and then pay off the proceeds of the loan, or the remainder of the loan with the proceeds of the house. If there's any money left over, then that gets divvied up to the estate. If you ever sell your home, you have to repay the reverse mortgage, or if you no longer live in that home, you have to repay the mortgage. Now there's a couple of things that I was worried about a little bit. One thing is if, let's say only one spouse, say the husband was the only one on title of the home, he decided to get a reverse mortgage, they get one, all of a sudden, 20 years later, he passes away. Well, all of a sudden, the reverse mortgage needs to be paid, but his wife is still living in the home, so she's actually going to have to sell the home in order to repay this loan if she doesn't have the money. So that's definitely something I would look into, why I'm talking about going with somebody that knows your situation. And another thing that really scared me was the idea that what happens if you owe more all of a sudden because your home equity didn't grow enough, the value of your home didn't grow enough over time to actually pay back the interest that has been building on this loan, because it'll be substantial. But from what I understand in Canada, something again that I would want to double check is that the lenders actually take this risk on, which means that if all of a sudden your home is only worth $500,000, but you're supposed to owe them $600,000, well, they cannot charge you more than the fair market value of your home. So that is something that I would definitely talk to the representative about, because that is definitely putting your estate and family at risk if that's not the case, because it could definitely work out that they are owed a whole bunch of money. There are a few ways that you can default on a reverse mortgage, but honestly, if they happen, any single one of them would actually be the person who applied for its fault. So you'd have nobody to blame but yourself. You can default on a reverse mortgage if you were dishonest in the application, if you don't follow the conditions of the contract. I'm sure they're not like too crazy. If you don't, or if you use the proceeds for illegal activity, so don't take that money and then decide that you want to be Walter White. That's probably a mistake. And if you allow your house to fall into a state of disrepair where all of a sudden it's actually not worth very much anymore because you just let it slide. So those are some problems that can happen. And what are the costs of a reverse mortgage? And this is something that I would ask them for sure, but the costs are fairly minimal, other than, of course, the interest that you are going to owe on the money that they're giving you, which is quite substantial. One of the downfalls of a reverse mortgage is that the lending rates are quite higher than a traditional mortgage. From what I understand, right now in Canada, they're approximately 5.5%, which is pretty substantial compared to 2.5% that you could get a traditional mortgage for. Other than that, you're going to have to pay an appraisal fee. It's probably about $500. Maybe some fees to set up the whole thing. I would ask the person about this, and potentially some professional, maybe some legal fees, but not overall, probably not too huge. Now, where can you get a reverse mortgage? There's, as far as I understand, there's only 2 lenders in Canada that do this. And I'm sure that every night when you're, watching Vanna, turn the numbers and you're clapping along and you're getting pumped up, that there's probably like 500 or 600 ads for reverse mortgages. So one is from Home Equity Bank, which has CHIP mortgages, which you've probably heard of. And then there's Equitable Bank that has a plan called Path Home Plan, which can be sold by mortgage brokers in Alberta, BC, and Ontario. So the rest of the country, the rest of the provinces, I guess you're dealing with a monopoly there with home equity bank. Some pros of reverse mortgages, that you don't have to make the regular loan payments. You don't have to worry about this. This is for your estate to worry about. Don't want to leave your kids with any money? That's great. You can turn some of the value of your home into cash, which is tax-free cash. You can do anything that you want with this money. One of the interesting things is that this money, it does come to you tax-free, and so that will not affect your old age security or potentially GIS payments. So I was thinking, you know, there could potentially be some good strategies with reverse mortgage if it meant that you could delay potentially taking your CPP to 70, or using that money so that you can also get GIS and OAS and just live off of that, because then you can leave your RSPs intact and pay it off later. Something I meant to say is that you can repay this loan at any time if you have the money, but just like any lender, I assume there are probably going to be some pretty substantial fees to break this before you actually sell your house or pass away. And the other thing is it allows you to still live in your home, because the other options, you could sell, you could rent, you could sell, you could downsize, you could have a little bit extra money, but you're no longer in your home. And the cons, obviously the higher interest rate. The equity is going to likely go down unless you live in a place where your home value, like Toronto or Vancouver, if you did this 10 years ago, obviously your house is now worth way more than you owe on that loan. But in a normal case scenario, in a normal market, well, your equity is going to decrease. The one thing is what happens if you pass away, and from what I understand, you have 180 days. This is something I would want to check again with the contract. 180 days to sell your home and repay the loan if you pass away, and up to a year if you decide to move into a long-term care home. So there is always the potential that your estate, your executor, can't sell the home within that 180 days. And now what would the penalty actually be for that? And I also assume that your kids and your beneficiaries are probably going to be pretty devastated when they find out that they're not actually getting the value of your home as part of their inheritance. So let's look at my example. As you know, I like round numbers. We've got a nice couple, Jim and Roxette, and they own a home worth $500,000, and they are both 65 years old, and they decide to go to the lender and borrow the maximum amount that they can. So 55% of $500,000, they have borrowed $275,000 at a 5.5% interest rate. Now let's also assume that their home value goes up a little bit above inflation, and it goes up at 3% per year. And we'll also assume that Jim and Roxette don't do anything with this money as far as investing it and then using it to pay it. They just go on a crazy year-round trip, and they just party, and they have the greatest time with the $275,000, and they forget about it, and they just lived life to the fullest. And at 90 years old, Jim and Roxette sadly both pass away, but they passed away in their home, and they had tons of nice memories, and everybody, you know, they lived a good life in their home. So Now all of a sudden this lender is going to be very excited, because if you take $275,000 and build up the interest that was owing on that at 5.5% for 25 years, well, all of a sudden Jim and Roxette's estate is going to owe this lender $1,084,000. And luckily for Jim and Roxette, the value of their home was going up at 3%, so the value of their $500,000 home in 25 years was almost the same amount. It was $1,057,000. So the lender cannot ask for more than the fair market value of the home, so they're going to want $1,057,000. However, one thing that the lender is not going to care about is that a realtor is going to be compensated probably about $40,000 to actually sell this home. So the estate is actually going to owe about an extra $40,000 to this lender. In this situation, yes, Jim and Roxette had a great time, went on a great trip, lived a great life, got to live the entirety of their life in their home, but their kids are pissed because they thought that they were getting about $1 million home as an inheritance, that they were going to go and they were going to live it up and go on a year-round trip around the world, and now all of a sudden they need to actually deplete $40,000 out of the estate somewhere to actually pay this off. So it probably would have worked out better for Jim and Roxette had they waited a few years to actually go on this trip and do the reverse mortgage, and maybe the lender wouldn't have lent them $55,000, I don't know, or 55%, I'm not sure. So, you know, in conclusion for me about reverse mortgages is that I could see certain scenarios where, you know, I wouldn't mind doing one, but there'd have to be a lot of planning going in place around it. Are we using it to our advantage in the right way to maximize government benefits, minimize taxes, actually, you know, helping? And are there better options out there for you? And have you actually weighed all the pros and cons and asked the right questions? And that's why I think it's so important to not just go out and get one because you heard that somebody did one and it was a great idea, or somebody was trying to sell you on the idea, because it might not be right for you, but then again it might. So a lot of questions to ask. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions at any time, and we'd be happy to answer them. Thanks.